argued in a different sense for quite a long time. The Chicago speech, which has been much quoted already in our evidence, and there was a consistent line of argument for him which went through the speech he made at College Station in Texas just after his Crawford meeting, and he's continued to this day. I mean, his interview the other day, 30th of December, with Fern Britton, in which he was asked, if you'd known then that there were no weapons of mass destruction, would you still have gone on? And he said, I would still have thought it right to remove him, meaning Saddam Hussein. He then said he'd have had to have used different arguments. We've heard from other witnesses how this seam of argument on regime change had been cemented, if you like, by the fact that it appeared to have succeeded in Kosovo, Sierra Leone, and indeed in Afghanistan at this stage. So did he hold a different view on regime change to the one that you've expressed so firmly?
Well, I wonder if I may, I think the best way to find that out is to ask him.
Well, we obviously will, but I mean, you said you were having a debate with him about it.
I mean, look, we're two different people.
But in one government.
Of course. And we came to a...
I'm trying to work out what the government's policy
was.
No, and
indeed, of course. But it would, you know, it's not... No great surprise to know that people at the senior levels of government hold strong views and debate those. What I had to offer the Prime Minister, which I hope I fulfilled, was my best judgment coupled with my loyalty, and that's what I expect of anybody else. That I don't in the least mind people disagreeing with me. Indeed, I encourage it, but I do ask them to be loyal, because otherwise you can't operate any kind of governmental system. But can I just make 2 points, if I may? First of all, about the Chicago speech. Chicago speech, really important speech, and what the Prime Minister was seeking to do in Chicago, in that speech, was to alert the world to the fact that we had been too tolerant of situations which were posing a threat to international peace and security through internal repression and humanitarian disaster. And it is also fair to say that it took Iraq and the kind of, what amounted to kind of catharsis in the system which followed that, that we had the high-level working group set up by Kofi Annan, and that has led not to a change in the Charter, but at least to a broad agreement about what's now called the responsibility to protect, and a wider sense of the responsibilities of the Security Council. And Tony Blair needs to be credited with getting that going. The second thing is, I know there's been huge textual analysis of the speech that Tony Blair made at Crawford. If you read the speech, I mean, he talks about regime change in general, and then it's a couple of paragraphs later that he comes on to talk about Iraq. And when he's talking about Iraq, actually he's using language rather similar to that which I'd used about the threat posed to the world by Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. And Jonathan Powell, I know, offered you some exegesis about the link. I mean, I don't, and you'll have, if I may say so, an opportunity to ask Mr. Blair all about that next Friday.
Okay, so there was a certain difference of view, I think I interpret this, between you and the Prime Minister on regime change, which you say is perfectly natural, but you at the same time were loyal to his point of view. There were a number of occasions, and the College Station speech was one, there were more in 2003, where the Prime Minister bracketed disarmament, weapons of mass destruction, with international terrorism in justifying the approach he was taking to Iraq. In 2003 February, for example, he said, the stance that the world takes now against Saddam is not just vital in its own right, it is a huge test of our seriousness in dealing with the twin threats of weapons of mass destruction and terrorism. Now, Iraq had not hitherto been classified as a country from which one was getting international terrorism. Were you concerned at the way the Prime Minister was, as one witness has put it, conflating these two issues?
I would have been concerned if he'd been claiming which he wasn't, and I'd made that clear in the memorandum which has now been leaked and plenty else. If there'd been any suggestion of a claim that the Iraqis had been involved in 9/11, because there was no evidence whatsoever to that effect. I don't think it was entirely unreasonable of him at all, however, to suggest that these were the two threats, because the problem that we saw was that of failing and/or rogue states, and you could have a state like North Korea, which, for its own reasons, was unquestionably developing a nuclear weapons capability, and that state could also have turned out to be a proliferator of weapons technology, and not only of nuclear weapons technology, but also much more portable and directly usable technology into other rogue states, which could then be available to international terrorists. And after all, one of the things we finally got comprehended after 9/11 was the fact that bang next door to Afghanistan, there's Pakistan. Pakistan had not only developed an effective, usable nuclear weapons infrastructure, but also had within it terrorist operations, part of which were sponsored by the state.
That was in Pakistan?
In Pakistan. So,
but not in Iraq?
No, but what I'm saying is you're asking me about was it unfair for the Prime Minister to put together threats from terrorism and threats from weapons of mass destruction.
With regard to Iraq?
Well, no, I'm sorry, I thought you were talking more generally.
No, I'm talking about with regard to Iraq.
So far as Iraq was concerned, I say the threat from Iraq, as at the 11th of September, as at the 20th of March 2003, was a threat, as we perceived it, from its weapons of mass destruction. It had certainly been involved in sponsoring terrorism against Israel. I mean, we knew that, but I don't put that in this. I mean, it's very serious, but it was confined to the Middle East, and so did other Middle Eastern countries.
Support for the families of Hezbollah and so on.
Yes, things like that. Okay.
So there wasn't really an argument that Saddam was helping the sort of terrorism that was being directed against us, certainly not Al-Qaeda. There wasn't a scenario in which he or Iraq seemed likely to be a country in which terrorists would get their hands on weapons of mass destruction. Pakistan, very different case, as you say. But with regard to Iraq, that scenario doesn't really seem probable, does it?
Well, there wasn't any evidence that Iraq had been involved in Al-Qaeda, full stop. There was evidence, however, that Saddam was ready to sponsor terrorism when he thought it was appropriate. And Sir Roderick, I can't speculate on what would have happened with the Saddam regime had we just allowed containment to wither and die, which I think was the alternative, except that Saddam would have been
Well, no, the
empowered.
alternative was to continue it and strengthen it, which is what you were trying to do.
Well, yes, I know, but we came to the view that it wasn't going to fly. But
Well, you got a resolution through the UN.
I'm aware of that.
You had the other apparatus of containment in place. Other countries thought, evidently the French, for example, that this was a viable policy.
The French agreed with or allowed 1409 to pass. I can't say they were, in practice, enthusiastic. And as I say, what 1409 dealt with was the goods review list. It didn't deal with these other absolutely crucial areas. I think it's quite, if I may say so, it's quite difficult to argue that at May 2002, the whole apparatus of containment was working. I mean, it wasn't, in my view, and Jeff Hume was telling you about the problems of enforcing the no-fly zones, for example.